This episode of the BeanCast is brought to you by Artisanal Agency, the exclusive representative of the This Week in Tech podcast network. Reach Twit.tv's tech-savvy, affluent, highly engaged audience by booking your campaign now. Visit artisanalagency.com to find out more. Bandwidth provided by Recursive Squirrel Interactive. Visit them on the web at recursivesquirrel.com. Episode 568, Beloved Like Oprah. Monday, November 18th, 2019. It's time for this week's edition of the BeanCast, a weekly discussion about the news and issues facing marketers today. I'm your host, Bob Norton. Thanks for joining us. Intent is the keystone of e-commerce. A consumer expresses a desire and we attempt to satisfy it. But as we've tried to duplicate the retail experience online, a core aspect of offline shopping still eludes us: discovery. How do we get there? Tonight we'll discuss. Also, how social media marketing has become too boring, insights from Alibaba's Singles Day promotion, Twitter's new topics feature, plus this week's Fair, Fail, Foul. That's the lineup. Let's meet tonight's panel. Thanks for joining us for this week's BeanCast. I'm Bob Norp, and with me on the panel for this evening, we start with the founder of the Idea Integration Company, the one, the only Mr. Saul Colt. Hi, Saul.
Hey, Bob, it's such a pleasure to be back. My 1-year-long monastic vow of silence is over, and I have a lot to say.
Okay, good. Well, I'm glad you have a lot to say because we have a lot to talk about. And also, we welcome back the Chief Marketing and Innovation Officer at California-based agency RPA, Mr. Tim Leake. Hi, Tim.
Hey, Bob. It's fantastic to be back. Thanks for having me again.
You're welcome. Well, today is a very e-commerce night. We're going to talk about online commerce because online commerce lives and breathes intent. Search is built around it. Product recommendations are powered by it. Programmatic ads thrive on it. But a Marketing Profs article that I read this week suggests that for e-commerce to grow, we need to also do a better job at injecting discovery into the equation because discovery is part of the retail experience. It's part of the offline world. And it's a key factor in introducing people to new products. So, Tim, first of all, do you agree with the assessment in the article? And if so, what needs to happen to encourage more of an offline shopping experience in an online world?
Yeah, I do agree with it. It's and it's it's not like it's a shift. It's great to have both of these things. But I always said, when with Target, you go to Target and you go in to buy a DVD and you walk out with like $300 of other stuff you weren't planning on buying. And instead, if you go to Amazon,
that's my Costco,
you just buy the DVD.
That's my Costco experience. Costco is usually like that. I walk into Costco to buy some eggs or bread, and the next thing I know, I'm buying bath mats for my bathroom. It's
right?
Just like it just happens.
It's been one of the challenges of actually the disruption that takes place is because people then just buy the one thing from Amazon or online instead of going down that rabbit hole. But at the same time, like when we go to Amazon now, every time I try to just like flip around and find an interesting gift for somebody or just browse, it's not that easy. It's only easy if you know what you're doing. And so, or you know what you're looking for. So I do think that how we get there, I don't have an easy solution for it. I imagine if all the engineers at Amazon haven't cracked it yet, I'm not going to figure it out on a podcast. But I think there's definitely some things that we could think about to be able to make that better. And maybe it's looking sideways at some of what's happening in other places where they make recommendations, like Netflix or some of the places where you're
I'm not sure that's
consuming entertainment.
I'm not sure I agree with the Netflix example in particular, because entertainment, it does a terrible job at discovery. That's one of the biggest complaints that a lot of people in the business, in the entertainment business, talk about. They talk about the fact that discovery is so difficult because there's so much content, and sourcing the exact right content based on your preferences is incredibly difficult. I mean, you can
Well,
express.
Spotify is pretty good at it. I mean, they managed to not necessarily feed me exactly what I'm doing already, but stuff I haven't heard that I would like. And I've always been impressed, say, by the Discover Weekly algorithm, in that the way they've put that together is right for me, and yet not a carbon copy of exactly what I was listening to already.
Well, fair enough. I mean, it's just like I'm not a Spotify user, so I can't really speak to that. But I
That
do
one's
know.
pretty good. And Facebook, I was telling you before we started. I mean, Facebook does a really good job with this in an advertising standpoint, and then they have this almost frustrating ability to serve me up an ad for something I had no idea I wanted, but I want it, and then I end up buying it, and I feel almost foolish how often I do that with Facebook ads, but it's pretty good, and it's not exactly something I was Googling already. Sometimes it's freakishly something I was talking about with my friends just a second ago, but oftentimes it's something I had no idea I wanted. It's just they seem to know me well enough to be able to suggest that. So I'm guessing it's out there, the ways that we could get this, and how we actually get there from an engineering standpoint. I'm not sure yet.
So one of the things that I think of when I think of discovery is literally finding out, not only new products, but more about the product. And that's a big place where Amazon falls down. So I'm not a big Amazon user. I'm not a big fan of Amazon. I think of Amazon as a utility. I certainly buy everything, that they have there, and they're where I go if I need something in like a hurry. But I'd much rather, maybe I'm not the norm, I'd much rather go to direct, or I'd go to where I can get some more information or unbiased reviews or all sorts of different things. Like for me, discovery, I buy so much weird garbage in the middle of the night off of Instagram that Instagram's kind of like the new infomercial for a modern age. Like if it's under, $30 and I think it's going to make me smile or something. I bought a magic trick off Instagram the other day because it was dumb and I thought it would cheer some people up. And you're never going to go looking for this stuff on Amazon. It's really interesting to see that, in a couple of the articles I read, that there's all sorts of numbers around that people want experiences, and I don't think of experiences coming from Amazon. Amazon is it's just, we have everything you want. We give you probably close to the best price, if not the best price. So just buy it and shut up. And I think that we're going to see more and more people like Nike who announced either this week or last week or whenever that they're stopping to sell directly through Amazon. There's all sorts of reasons for it, but my guess is, and of course the only people who actually know why they're not doing it are Nike and Amazon, but Nike really spent the last 2 years building up their own boutique apps and building up their own online destinations where not only can they upsell you, and not only can they get you buying more stuff, in between your purchases, they fill it up with content. They own the customer, which, a lot of e-commerce platforms like Amazon don't let the seller actually own the customer information. And, it's like, I think that in between the purchase thing is really where a lot of smart marketers and smart businesses are going to start investing their time to make e-commerce much more than just a utility and more of a community. And as stupid as it sounds, we'll go back to the good old days when people actually talked about things online.
Mm-hmm. When you say that, it makes me think of Etsy, which is actually pretty decent at this as well. And maybe it's because of the community, maybe it's because of how they write their descriptions, because they're a bit more detailed than Amazon's are. But that's an interesting place where I can type in a kind of a vague search term, and you find all sorts of interesting stuff that I wouldn't have thought to. And it's probably just unique to that particular type of marketplace.
But isn't
but
that
it's a
just
good example?
That's just another example of intent, though. I mean, you're intending to buy something, and then it makes recommendations of tangential things that you can buy based on that search parameter. I mean, it's making
That's true.
It's making
so I guess it's different. It's different than say walking into Target aiming to buy a DVD, but walking out with laundry detergent and cookies and stuff like that. Is
Right,
that what you mean?
exactly. Or finding a brand new brand that you've never even considered before that's, in a completely different category that you weren't there to go buy. I mean, it's just like I think that's what true discovery is. And having said all this, I love what Saul said about the Instagram phenomenon because so many people are telling me the exact same thing. I mean, they're buying stuff off Instagram like left and right. And I'm wondering if the problem of discovery in e-commerce is not an e-commerce problem, but more of a where we're advertising, how we're introducing, how we're building awareness for products. Because I look at the offline world, and the offline retail world is not that much better than the online retail world in terms of creating discovery. I mean, you get a gigantic pyramid of cans at an end cap, and you might discover a brand new beer, or you might discover a new vegetable that you didn't want before, But I mean, it's not a very elegant nor truly effective way of discovery, of creating discovery in the retail experience. So, I mean, is it such a big deal that the online world is not creating discovery in their retail environments, or at
Well,
least not
it's
creating effective discovery?
it is a big deal because the promise of social media a decade ago was leveling the playing field for smaller voices to have a bigger say in things. And if we want to take that a step further, the internet is supposed to be leveling the playing field for smaller brands to compete with larger brands. And if there's no discovery, no folksy brand that is maybe one step up above Etsy is going to have any chance of really becoming a big deal unless they somehow luck out to
But
get
what are
onto Shark Tank, which is again free mass media, although they give up equity
I
and
agree
all
with
sorts of
you.
things.
I agree with you wholeheartedly, Saul. I mean, in the sense that discovery needs to happen online in interesting avenues, and we need to be more
Mm.
creative in the way we create discovery. But the retail environment has always been a lockdown with the big brands. I mean, if you're a new company trying to get your product out, Walmart was this huge gatekeeper that kept you out. And that's why
Mhm.
direct to consumer brands kind of sprung up because it got around the gatekeepers. And I'm wondering if that's more the answer. It's less about creating discovery in the retail experience online and more about trying to leverage the opportunities to create awareness via advertising, via marketing, via experiences, via other types of tools that are available to the online community.
I think that makes perfect sense. And word of mouth as well. I mean, most of the time when I discover something truly, it's because somebody told me about it. Somebody recommended that just over the course of a conversation or something like that. So, to put this analog between offline shopping and online shopping, I guess it's not other than just maybe randomly seeing something on the shelf. I don't discover stuff just because I walked into the store. It's as you say, it's this combination of all these other places that it gets out there. So I don't know, through that prism, it's actually not that far behind.
Let me ask you guys this, and it might seem like a strange question, but is true discovery counter to the very structure of e-commerce today? Because e-commerce is set up to be all about satisfying the needs of the consumer, which is all about intent, and it drives in that direction. I'm just wondering if the structure of e-commerce itself, how it's been built, is a vast impediment to creating any kind of discovery, and that we need to go around, like I've been saying, around these e-commerce platforms in order to create awareness for new products, to create discovery of new ideas, etc.
Well, the way we've netted out on e-commerce, it's not designed for discovery. It's designed for um, less number of clicks, the better. No friction.
Right.
We've already got your credit card. We've already got your home address. One click this, get in, get out, go back to your day. Where e-commerce. I remember, and like I'm gonna play the nostalgia card right now. I remember these amazing stories of a long time ago of where shopping malls will be these virtual environments where you still schmy around and look on racks, and everything will just be digital and stuff like that, and you sort of you click on what you want, and while that never happened and probably shouldn't have ever happened, it's still it's like you go in, you get what you want, hey, maybe you need when I buy stuff on Amazon, in the early days of Amazon, it was maybe you would like this, and this too. And now it's really just, oh, you bought, an electronic device. Do you need batteries? Do you need a cord? Do bundle sort of three things together. But I remember, those early days, you bought a CD, they were pushing two other bands that you've maybe never heard of and said, all this stuff. And that's all gone away because it's all about, you know, don't get anything trapped in your shopping cart. Don't bounce off the site. So it's just lowest friction for everything. Get in, get out. We'll send it to you, and thank you. Come back when you need something more.
It's true. I mean, the music thing is exactly a perfect metaphor. We used to here in Los Angeles have a great record shop called Aaron's Records, and you'd walk in and they'd have this wall of different CDs that different people who worked there were recommending, and it was a phenomenal way to truly discover something, sometimes entire new genres that I'd never heard. That we just don't have that. Even when you have something as sophisticated as Spotify's algorithm, it's not quite the same as I can't say that I've ever discovered a new genre through that, right? It's not going to take that kind of a leap, and it simply isn't built the same way. And I lament that a lot, and then get eyeball rolls from millennials who think I'm just being too nostalgic about the way that we used to discover music, but it has changed.
The last question I had written out was about privacy, and I'm wondering, does a move toward better discovery run afoul of privacy? And I'm just gonna answer the question myself and see what you think. I don't think it does run afoul of discovery. In fact, true discovery run afoul of privacy rather. True discovery, when it comes about, is not about understanding the customer. It's about making somebody aware of something that they may never have considered, that they've expressed no intent for. I mean, it's like Steve Jobs with the iPod. I mean, who would have thought that you would want something like that device? It is like at the time period, they had failed MP3 players that weren't doing a lot of business, and yet he created something, or Apple created something that was pretty magical in the process, and taught us to want something. And I'm wondering, is there an advantage in building a discovery engine or some kind of discovery process in that you don't need to house reams and reams of data? You just need to know that you have a great product and that you're going to got to get the word out about it.
So I don't think people care about privacy if it makes their life more convenient. And I know people will say I'm wrong. I'm one of the people that
I agree with you.
I've given up on privacy, not because I want to, but I just think that we don't have any privacy anymore. So why fight it? But it's like examples of the early days of Uber, when like the maybe not privacy but convenience. People overlooked a lot of things in the early days because they showed up at your door at 2 a.m. and got you to wherever you wanted to be. Convenience trumps almost everything, and that's kind of where we are as a society, at least in North America. And I think that gets people excuse a lot of things in the name of convenience.
Yeah, I wholeheartedly agree. And I'm one of those people as well who says that the consumer doesn't really want privacy as long as you're giving them a decent service. If you're making their life easier in some meaningful way and you're not screwing with their data.
Mm-hmm.
I agree with both of you guys on that.
Well, we're going to move on in just a minute and talk about social media marketing. We just touched on it briefly, but we'll get into it more in depth, because right now there's some people out there saying that social media marketing has reached peak boredom. We'll talk about that in just a second. But first, I got to talk about our sponsor for this evening. So look, if you're out there, you need to reach a tech-minded audience, right? Maybe you're in tech yourself, or maybe your product is just something that is exploring new high-income markets or something like that. Well, I can connect you with what is arguably the most responsive and lucrative technology-minded audience out there, because our sponsor, Artisanal Agency, is the exclusive representative for Twit.tv. That's the This Week in Tech podcasting network. Now, we're talking about shows like MacBreak Weekly, one of the granddaddies of podcasting. We're talking about iOS Today, Windows Weekly, And of course, This Week in Tech, the biggest podcast out there in marketing and technology discussion. And that's just 4 of their many amazing shows, all of which are generating phenomenal results for sponsors every single day. And listen to these numbers, because these are fantastic. 50 million downloads a year. 50 million. 70% of that audience directly works in tech, and 82% of them say that they have bought a product directly as the result of a twit.tv ad recommendation. And remember, they are offering an actual live read recommendation here, much like we do here on the show. And they take this responsibility extremely seriously. Not just anyone can advertise on twit.tv. That's because Artisanal Agency will carefully vet each sponsor so that their tech journalists hosts can offer your brand a wholehearted recommendation without any kind of encumbrance. And at the same time, you can relax knowing there won't be any brand safety issues because everybody on the ad network is completely vetted. Now, whether you're coming with a completely baked campaign or you need some graphics or ad copy help, Artisanal Agency will offer you a hands-on approach. They'll do as much or as little as you need to get your spot on the air, and they ensure your campaigns run seamlessly, from onboarding the hosts to delivering creative assets to monitoring your ad reads. So reach out today to start your campaign on the twit.tv network. Visit artisanalagency.com. That address again is artisanalagency.com. Or find out more by emailing them at hello@artisanalagency.com. That's hello@artisanalagency.com. Start your next podcast ad campaign with a show from Twit, and we thank them very much for their support of the BeanCast. Well, there's little doubt that as social media has begun to mature, the fun has seemingly left the room here, facing everything from pressure for results to cancel culture going at its business every single day. Few brands are willing to or even able to implement the kinds of whimsical initiatives that characterize the early days of social. Saul, is this a good sign? Is this a good thing, a sign of maturity or something? Or is the net result taking the teeth out of social media and resulting in nothing but lots of noise and little effect in terms of social media marketing?
So, Bob, I'm glad you gave me this question because as a recognized world leader in social media thinking, I'll say this. Not only social media marketing, but social media in general has gotten really awful and boring, and because of a few reasons. There's been so many articles recently that say people want brands to stand for something, but so few are willing to take the public risk, either, because the CMO knows that they could get fired instantly, or, shareholder value, or all those things. But if we learn anything from the Nike Colin Kaepernick ad from a couple years ago, that, there was tons of protests and there was tons of, attention thrown their way, mostly negative, but the shares went up because the protesters weren't customers to begin with. And the people that were customers and the people who did identify with that brand really saw this as something like that they wanted to be a part of, and they really wanted more of. So brands are more and more worried about public outrage. And, we really do live in an outrage culture, but the only people that are really losing, we've spoken 1,000 times on the show about people don't hate ads, they hate bad ads. And there's also a real appetite right now for brands to be a little more risque. They don't have the nerve to do it. And another thing to remember is social media is the great amplifier, and this is probably a reason that people won't do any of this stuff anymore. But social media marketing right now is so uninspired because as a nation we're uninspired. We're living in a weird time, and when I didn't talk for a whole year, like I mentioned at the beginning of the show, I realized that Facebook, they're not inventing things for us to argue about. They're just amplifying the things that we already hate, and that that scares the whatever out of brands. But it shouldn't, because the one thing that customers keep telling us over and over is they do reward the brands that take risks. Look at the times that Wendy's have been virtually put on the shoulders of their fans because they did something really interesting, or KFC and Nike and all these things. But The problem is there's only 5 or 6 brands that any of us could name off the top of our head that are doing anything interesting and anything worthy of talking about anymore. So it's all become, just hate and outrage and nothing interesting and nothing shareable. And that's why I agree wholeheartedly. It is so boring, and the people who are losing out are the customers, because they want to be inspired. They want to be taken for a ride. They want to be, really part of the brand in ways that they've never had access to before.
It's less boring on TikTok and YouTube, though. And those aren't the same types of social channels as Facebook and Twitter and LinkedIn. But it's fascinating to see what's going on over here. And I think one of the challenges we have is that democratized creativity is so much more interesting and engaging right now than the curated creativity that's coming out of the advertising and marketing industry. And I think that's one of the challenges that we have is it's hard to compete to come up with the thing we're going to put out there and say, hey, this is great and this is fun, this is really interesting, compared to all of the stuff that the world is putting out there. And on top of that, the media spend and the audience size doesn't really typically justify the amount of work it takes to get that to be both really good, to be breakthrough, to be on brand, to get cleared, to be safe. I agree completely with what Saul said. It's also dangerous because you're worried you're going to get canceled, that people are going to, have a problem with whatever you said. All of those things, I think, combine to make it less. But I'm not positive that as a nation we're uninspired. I don't agree with that. If you go, man, I spend 5 minutes with TikTok and I'm blown away by the amount of inspiration that I get from it.
A lot of people out there, though, they continually say that social media marketing, or especially the real-time marketing that goes on social media, that it's like holding a gun to your head, like it's playing Russian roulette. And, the stats support them pretty heftily. I mean, with the obvious exceptions of some of the brands out there that you mentioned who are doing consistently good work and consistently good messaging and relationship building online, most other brands, it just is a scary space to step out on a limb and do something that might get you a little bit of attention, but really opens you up to the possibility of a massive backlash if you get it wrong. And I'm wondering, are the benefits of social media worthy of doing something risky, as opposed to just holding back and using the platform more as a listening tool and more as a research tool about your audience?
But you don't have to be risky to be entertaining. Like all the greatest social media campaigns, sadly, maybe it's just where my brain is and I live in the past, but, all the great ones happened in the earlier days. I don't know if you guys remember, I'm blanking on the actor's name. He kind of looks like he should be James Bond. He was in a movie called The Crooper, Clive Owens. He did a campaign. He did a campaign with BMW where it was an online only social media thing where they basically created like 4 or 5 3-minute action movies to promote BMW and stuff like that. Nothing risque in there. They're not, making mattresses out of the World Trade Center and things like that. Like they're not going over the line. It was, this is what our car does. So let's show you it do 180s in the most entertaining way possible. Like I think.
But was that really social media though?
I think it predates social media.
I think that was like that was more content marketing that used social media to amplify itself. I'm not
okay, so if we want to go strictly to kind of like the social media thing, there's so many interesting safe examples of KFC only following 11 people and they're all named Herb or something, whatever.
See, that's brilliant.
Spice Girls.
It's really great.
Yeah. Spice Girls. There's so many and I'm sure that was probably a throwaway idea that everyone thought was stupid, and they said, well, it'll only take us 10 minutes to do it. Let's just do it, and it got them, how many millions of dollars worth of free advertising and free promotion and stuff like that, and people still talk about that stuff. Like, nobody's taking chances anymore, and chances don't have to be edgy. They can be clever and entertaining. And I don't see that. Like, to be honest with you, some of the most edgy stuff I see on social media right now, it's like couple fast food, quick service locations. I think Sesame Street does an amazing job. Obviously, they have resources and characters to do some cool stuff, but like, it's like you can't name that many people who are doing really, really interesting stuff.
You're right. And one of the reasons that I think, that we talk a lot in the advertising industry about trying to help brands create culture and be a part of culture as opposed to just following. And I think one of the weird things about social media is there's just such a big aspect of social media that is just following trends. And it's trying to talk like people talk on the internet, and it's trying to follow whatever the hashtag of the day is or be really timely with whatever just got mentioned. And while I think there can be benefits to joining a conversation people are interested in, at the same time that's dangerous. And arguably, I haven't put this to the test yet, but most of the good stuff that I can think of that's really thrived in social media, a lot of the time what they're doing is they're creating something themselves, and they're having the confidence to put it out there and just be themselves. And even no, Wendy's doesn't really follow that model, obviously, but there's a lot of, especially when they're just putting interesting content out there, where it does follow that. And I think that's probably a safer place to be, because the Russian roulette aspect, Bob, that you talk about, that tends to get people when they want to comment on 9/11, or they're going to get involved in China, which we'll talk about in a second. Those are the things that really blow up in people's faces. And but if you just create something cool like Saul is talking about, who's going to get mad at that?
One of the things that gets me about this topic, because I was on the fence about whether or not social media was indeed getting more and more boring. I mean, Twitter seems to be getting more boring. Facebook seems to be getting more boring, but Instagram seems like it's completely alive and thriving. It's just like, then you mentioned Snapchat and TikTok. Thriving networks, interesting stuff happening, really cool things from a marketing perspective across the board on these platforms going on. And I'm like, maybe it's not that social media is becoming boring. It's just that certain platforms, certain legacy platforms are inherently less effective and less worth the risk than other platforms. Do you guys agree with that? Or is that just me stepping off the reservation?
You know what, I think that, and again, I'm going to go to like an old adage. It's like it's like 2009 night here at the BeanCast, but it's like you go where your audience is. So should Rolls Royce be playing in TikTok or whatever? Probably not. Maybe they should be. I don't know. I don't spend any time in TikTok, so if you're trying to find me, it's probably not the best place to find me. Do platforms become kind of stale? Absolutely. But it's also they're just vehicles, they're just distribution methods. So not that the bad ads or boring ads have hurt Facebook and made it stale in any stretch of the imagination, but if you're doing really great stuff, chances are you're going to populate it everywhere, or people are going to find it and share it in a bunch of different places. So I still think that and if we're talking social media versus social media marketing, I see them as two totally different things. But from the marketing standpoint, I just think that people are living in fear to do anything remotely interesting. But it's interesting that people aren't fearful to do things in real life that are kind of crazy and interesting. So I'd love to sort of know where that mindset is, and maybe it's just a results thing, and maybe it's like what you guys mentioned earlier about it's just there's so many hands that something has to go through before anything even gets posted. We the Oreo Super Bowl ad that don't really think anybody talks about anymore, but it had a good 5 or 6 year run as the most brilliant thing ever. And no one ever talked about it. I think we talked about it on the show, that there was like 25 people in a room and half of them were lawyers before that thing went up. It wasn't spontaneous. It wasn't, off the cuff, but like that was what social media was about in the beginning. And that's what social media marketing was about in the beginning. And, I had a conversation with Scott Monty, who of course has been on the show many times recently. And we were actually talking about this exact subject, and, maybe a little bit, we didn't certainly come up with an answer, but a little bit is because there aren't faces for brands anymore. Like there aren't that one person who's responsible for the voice of the brand, where it's like you can give that person a break if they make a bit of a mistake. The all those sort of like the wave of community management has kind of gone, out the door, and maybe it'll come back eventually, or in some kind, but you don't see any people's faces on the avatars of tier one brands anymore, and you don't really know the names of anybody who you're tweeting back and forth for. So that removes the personality, and that removes the the personalization of it. The way, and that's probably why we do have a little bit more of outrage culture and things like that, because all these brands have given up on having a human side to them. It's just push content, push content. If you're going to push content, that content better be really cool and fun and interesting. Otherwise, people are going to ignore it.
Well, good points all, and absolutely one of the ongoing issues of the internet is deciding whether or not social media is the place to be. But a lot of brands need to suck it up and do some more interesting stuff, I think, in the end, if they're going to survive in that venue. Well, I want to move on. I want to talk next about Alibaba's Singles Day. I read an interesting analysis of the event on Adweek that took things from an unusual angle. Yes, Taylor Swift headlined the event, but unlike previous years, she was the only Western talent included, as of this report that I read. So it raised a number of interesting questions for the writer that resulted in essentially this assessment. Considering the success of this year's event, maybe Chinese economic and cultural power is on the verge of truly eclipsing that of the West. They didn't need us for their commerce. They did $1 billion in the first minute or 10 minutes of the event. They didn't need our culture. They had Taylor Swift, but mainly had Chinese stars. Tim, what are your thoughts on this, and what are the implications to the future of marketing if this is really the case, if this is the first signal of the eclipsing of Western dominance in terms of economic and cultural power?
Well, there's a lot of angles to this, and the focus of the Adweek article actually seemed to they focused in a lot on whether or not this Taylor Swift being there might actually be damaging to her own brand, and which I doubt, but it's an interesting aspect, or it's an interesting question I'll get back to in a second. But I think also there wasn't really a clear answer as to why there wasn't more Western talent, and it could be exactly as you are guessing, that there's plenty of cultural power coming from China as themselves, and that's good, and it should be. And yeah, Singles Day is going to be a huge success whether or not we have great Western talent there or not. But I think one of the things that when you ask about the impact of marketing, I actually took this to kind of a similar discussion that we were or similar area that we were having in our last discussion, which is I think that there's so much political dynamite around China, and that might be why some other people weren't there. That's what they were saying could be dangerous to Taylor Swift. Recently, Daryl Morey from the Houston Rockets, he shared a tweet of support for the protesters in Hong Kong, and it apparently cost the NBA millions and millions of dollars. And that was just, you would think that was a safe thing, but it wasn't.
Let's talk about that aspect first before you go on. Let's talk a little bit about that, because it's not just the NBA, it's Hollywood movies. Hollywood movies have huge Chinese investment these days, and decisions on scripts are being made based on what can get past the Chinese censors. So culturally, China is exerting way more influence on our films than we're exerting on them in terms of our cultural impact. And when I'm seeing what happened at Singles Day and see how effective they were just by staying within the bounds of their own safe little place, I'm just wondering what that impact is.
So go ahead. I would say I did a quick little Google search, and the only mention of Taylor Swift being at Singles Day or having some sort of negative thing of any kind that I could find was this Adweek article. So it's certainly not taken the world by storm, and people aren't have their pitchforks and stuff like that. So as far as it ruining her brand, I think it's safe to say the only people who probably care about this are people in the industry of marketing and advertising. As far as what you said about movies being influenced by this, totally agree 100%, but I'm going to put a different sort of spin on it. And I would say that it's got less to do with Chinese culture and more to do with Chinese investment. So it's more on the movie production side. It's these entertainment properties and all these people who are taking the investment with the understanding that, someone's got to get paid back and everyone wants to make money and stuff like that. So has Chinese culture overstepped Western culture? I have no idea. I don't pay that much attention to it than that. But I think, I don't know, I kind of read this article and I didn't really understand why it was even a big deal. It would be, I thought it would be more interesting if it was like, hey, it's been a month since she performed. This has been the fallout or something along these lines. But the whole article didn't really have a conclusion. And I know we're supposed to come up with, is it going to change anything or not? I couldn't find anybody who cared.
No, I don't think anybody does care about, what Taylor Swift did there, but it is interesting that it in terms of its relevance for marketing, that we have to be concerned about such things. And, whether it's Hollywood or whatever, China is a huge audience and it's a huge investor in a lot of things. So you have to be concerned about that. Likewise, the political climate here in the United States. It's so easy to accidentally offend a huge chunk of your audience. And at the same time, we've got, I think, Saul, you mentioned it earlier, that, everybody says that people want brands to take a stand on things. It's like a catch-22, are you going to take a stand on things, or are you going to lose the NBA millions of dollars for taking a stand on something? That's, to get back to your key question, Bob, about what are the implications for the future of marketing? It's just more landmines. And I think that's the dangerous thing. And the really interesting takeaway is, how do we come up with something? We've got all these landmines here that no matter what you do, something could blow up in your face, and not doing something can also blow up in your face.
Yeah, exactly my point, and I think that when we're talking about I take your point, Saul, that it's just it's about investment, it's just it's not about culture. But the way that the Chinese have systematically exported their culture around the world is through economics. It's through that investment plan that they're doing. They're doing infrastructure construction projects around the world, and basically putting entire governments in their pocket just by basically making them owe them all this money to do all these infrastructure projects. From the standpoint of Hollywood, that's them entering into our entertainment business will affect us. And it's just and I'm not coming down saying that's horrible. I don't know whether it's horrible. I just know that it really changes the dynamic, and it changes the equation. And how do we respond to it? And how does that affect marketing? How does it affect the way that we go out and bring new ideas to the table when we have this economic millstone around our neck when we're talking about dealing with China? It's an interesting question. I don't know that we can answer it.
Well, if you go a little deeper in the whole NBA fallout, there was I know I keep bringing up Nike and every time I talk, but there was a lot of conversation around is Nike being a hypocrite in this whole NBA fallout. I read an interesting article I didn't agree with. The person, it seemed very kind of unthought out and sort of personal vendetta towards Nike in some way. But they said that Nike was being hypocritical for not taking a stand against the NBA. When Nike, they really didn't have an opinion on any of it because it's one of their biggest partners, the NBA. They do a lot of business in China. They decided not to get involved, not to have a statement either way. And I think that's probably the best way they could have actually handled the situation, because it wasn't their fight. So it was really something between the NBA and the Chinese government. The one step that Nike did take is they did remove jerseys from their flagship store in China, and they did do a couple of things, but they didn't, take a big stand either way. And I think, it's like I want my brands to stand for something, but it's like there is a limit to all of that. So I'm sensitive to, what you can get away with and what you can't get away with as well. But like when I say I want my brands to stand for something, I want my brands to do something above just making a donation to a charity. I want them to actually take steps to do whatever, and that whatever thing could be any number of things that actually fit their brand personality. But as far as like starting world issues and getting involved in things like that, I don't think any brand should really be so vocal in that respect, because it just doesn't make sense. I've sort of lost my train of thought, so I'm kind of rambling right now, but I don't know what I'm saying anymore. So
No,
I'm
no,
going to stop talking.
you made really good points about, it's not an easy question to deal with, and it does impact the way that we have to think about the types of ads that we're doing and the types of marketing that we're doing. And it's just like maybe the best solution is to pick your battles where they may lay. But it's just like I still think that we need to take some kind of stand for what we believe in. I mean, it seems like the answer of just rolling over and allowing this influence to affect our ethical stances on things like freedom and choice and other types of expression that are very much part of the American ideal is problematic. And if your brand is willing to do that for the sake of investment, that's problematic as well. And we need to really start to question those types of things as we pull together marketing campaigns. Well, I'm going to move on to our last topic. Just a really quick roundup. I'm going to start with Tim here. Twitter has a new topics feature. Basically, you can pick a topic, and that topic is going to start showing up in your feed. It's a little bit different than the Discovery tab that they have right now. What do you think of this move? Is this going to help make Twitter more relevant? Is it going to make it more useful? Your thoughts?
So I'm sure it'll help new people that come on that don't know who to follow. I think for those of us who've used Twitter for ages, it's not that helpful. I really tried to just like experience it, and I must have searched for 25 different topics, and none of them were one of their features or were one of those topics that I could actually just subscribe to. The only ones I could do were the ones I read about online. I know it's turned on because I could go look up WWE and follow that topic, which I don't care about, but I read about it in the article about it. So I think it's cool as long as it does. You guys mentioned earlier how much Twitter has changed. It's just not what it used to be anyways. I miss being able to make connections, genuine connections with other people that were sharing interesting things. It is a cesspool of complaining negativity most of the time these days. And it's just different. So I guess I shouldn't whine about it being different, but it feels like one of those features that probably should have been there from the beginning. So given that, I'm sure it's going to be great. I hope people don't come and just follow it and not contribute, because that would be boring for the community.
Yeah, agreed. And Saul, what are your thoughts?
So I had the same experience. I couldn't find a lot of the topics that I was interested in, but I am hopeful because, reading what I read about it, I think this possibly give a different level of voices or different voices to bubble up to the top on some topics that you care about. Because, for the most part, we live in a society where we curate our own content. I don't get very much pro Donald Trump stuff in any of my feeds because the people I follow, don't sort of live that life. And I think it's kind of important to have kind of both sides of the story on every topic you're interested in, so you can actually have a little bit more of a balanced opinion on things, fair and balanced, like Fox News's slogan. So I'm hopeful that this works the way they're saying, but in actual execution, I wasn't able to get what my hopes sort of entailed.
Well, with that, it's time for this week's Fair, Fail, Foul. But before we get to that segment of the show, I do want to take this quick opportunity to thank my guests again and allow them to each do a shameless plug, starting with Saul Colt. You can find him at theideaintegration.com. That's the home of his experiential agency doing phenomenal work for lots of brands around the world. Tell us what's going on in your world, Saul. What would you like to promote?
Well, we talked a lot about today about how brands need to be, a little bit more experience driven. So, guess what? That's what I do for a living. If you guys want to create things that are a little bit more interesting than just sending out a boring tweet or something along those lines, we do all sorts of experience stuff, word of mouth stuff. I have a very rare window of opportunity to take on one new project. So, if anyone's interested in talking to us, if you want to know how your company can be beloved like Oprah, please drop us a line at theideaintegration.com.
I think you ought to trademark that. Beloved like Oprah. I think that's a phenomenal way to
I'm
sell
sure
yourself.
Oprah would have no problem with it.
I'm sure she wouldn't. Now, Tim Leake, you can find him at rpa.com. That's the home of the agency where he is the Chief Marketing and Innovation Officer. Tell us what's going on in your world. What would you like to promote?
It's funny because I always have it's not really bad timing, but it's funny timing that I always seem to do this show like the week after I just did a big talk. So I spoke last week at the Los Angeles TV and Innovation Festival, and it was fantastic, but it's a little late to promote that. If I could be really shameless, we were talking about discovery earlier. My wife has an awesome company that if you're looking for gifts for the holidays, she combines crystals and air plants at a really nice price point, so it's perfect for like that coworker or person that you don't know what to get. She's in over 200 retail stores, but you can buy direct versus via Etsy, and that's at etsy.com/shop/rockanair, which is ROCKNAIR. Super shameless, but she'll love me for doing that.
Oh, yeah, that's a great idea. And right in time for the holidays, so good for you.
And on topic, right? Because we're talking about discovery.
Very much so. As for me, for more information about me or the show, visit thebeancast.com. There you can find a complete show archive. You can find out how to consult with me. And of course, you can find out how to advertise on this program. So check it all out at thebeancast.com. And now it's time for this week's Fair, Fail, Foul, a rundown of the best and worst of advertising, marketing, and public relations from the last week. First, the fair of the week. I love this Amazon move that they did, Tim. I mean, Amazon created a sensation over the last week by orchestrating front page takeovers of multiple newspapers to promote their new film, The Report, which is all about redacted documents. And here they have a redacted front page with current headlines that look like the Los Angeles Times front page cover, only it's all redacted. It's amazing. It's so arresting. And it's been so talked about and effective. I love this move. I mean, just the orchestration of it is impressive. The execution is almost passé compared to that.
Well, both are great. I mean, it's so spot on for what they did. It gets noticed, and it really makes a striking comment about, what if this was the world, and even trying to decipher the headlines through what was blacked out. I did think what was really funny is one of the few publications they weren't able to do that with was the Washington Post, which is owned by Jeff Bezos.
Right.
And this is an Amazon Studios film. For some reason, they weren't able to do it that way because the Washington Post won't do it. So he didn't bend the rules for them, but they managed to get all these other amazing publications. And it's a great idea.
Well, it proves that.
I always know when an idea is great is when I'm jealous that I didn't think of it. So
yes.
If Roger Ebert was still alive, he would give this 2 voice boxes up, way up.
Too soon.
Yeah. No, this is a really brilliant idea.
Now, the fail of the week came from Uber. Uber CEO Dara Khosrowshahi was interviewed by Axios and asked about his thoughts on having Saudi Arabia as such a large investor, 5th largest investor in the Uber brand, especially considering that the kingdom is blamed for the assassination and dismemberment of journalist Jamal Khashoggi. What follows was the stuff of PR nightmares, Saul. I mean, he just literally said, we got to get over it. And I'm like, you got to get over it? Wait, what are you talking about? And they gave him so many chances to get out of it, and he kept digging himself deeper. And then when he gets home, some PR person talks some sense into him, and he tried to walk it back. I mean, it's pathetic.
The quote is maybe one of the there's nothing funny about murder except maybe this when what he said and this goes back to like what we talked about with investments from other countries, but his actual quote was, "It's a serious mistake," in reference to the slain journalist. He goes, "But we've made mistakes too, right? Like with self-driving cars, and we stopped driving and we're recovering from that mistake." So apparently
Totally the same.
yeah, it's exactly the same. And one thing I would love to know, just as sort of curiosity, was the slain journalist a Lyft user?
I don't know. That's pretty bad.
you got to think,
Yeah,
like, did they not guess that question might be coming their way? I'm amazed that they didn't have like some straight up talking points for when that would come up. Just knowing, this is a person who's got a board seat and everything. I'm just amazed that nobody had trained for that.
Yeah, media training should have been all over that question. Well, the foul of the week is that Google has turned a project that is perfectly legal and even helpful into a huge, massive problem for themselves simply by not being transparent about what they were doing in the first place. They have this project called Project Nightingale, which works with Ascension Health. And the whole idea was to use the power of Google to connect the patient data so that doctors could be more efficient in treating their patients, and information could be shared more easily throughout the organization to people who are authorized to see it. Unfortunately, they totally were secret about it, never told any of the patients they were doing it, and they caused this huge uproar. And that's what blows my mind, Tim. I mean, I'm sitting there going, there's nothing wrong with what they did, except that you should have told people you were doing it.
Yeah, it just doesn't seem that hard, right? Just be transparent. And it doesn't give us any context in terms of why they didn't, but it really isn't that big of a deal. To the conversation we were having about privacy earlier, I think generally we're all getting much more comfortable with this, especially if there's a benefit for us. But the not knowing, the secretive stuff, it just makes people go, why didn't you tell us? What are you doing with it? It makes people skeptical and fearful, and who knows, so easily avoided.
Yeah, I also think it's interesting, like, I think for the most part, people in the industry or in the know would think that Amazon has more information about people than anyone, but man, that's got to be a close race between Amazon and Google. It'd be kind of amazing to know what these people know about you.
Yeah, it really would be. Well, have something to suggest for this list or just want to discuss it? Comment online. Use the hashtag #FairFailFoul. That's #FairFailFoul. Well, that does it for this week's show. If you'd like to subscribe to this podcast, visit our website at thebeancast.com and click on the subscribe link. If you're an Apple Podcast listener, we've also provided a direct link to our listing there, or just search for the BeanCast in the podcast directory on the Apple Podcasts app. And whichever podcast directory you use, when you subscribe, please leave us a review. Got a comment? Have a question? We'd love to hear from you. Just send your emails to beancast@gmail.com. Opening theme was performed by Joe Seibel. Closing theme by C. Jax. Thanks for listening. I'm Bob Norp. We'll be back again next week. Hope you'll join us then.
You know what I mean? It's like if it's, you know what I mean? I don't know, man. Just like, okay, it's like, you know what I mean? Like, it's like totally like that. It's like, I don't know, like if it's, it's like, you know what I mean? Yeah, it's just like kind of, it just seems like it's just like almost exactly. It's like exactly. Yeah. You know what I mean? Exactly.
Cool beans.